Shall we begin then? I think so. I'll we'll introduce ourselves to you all, and then we'll give our presentation, and we have some space at the end for questions, so you can speak to us about the presentation and give your own comments, your own situation with how you're using AI. My name is Daniel Vecchio, and I am a professor of philosophy and religious studies here at Victor Valley College, and chair and also co-chair of our SLOAC. Nathan?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Nathan Franklin. I'm the chair of the English department at VVC and a co-chair of the student learning outcomes with Dan.
And Julia?
Yeah, I'm Julia Wendt. I'm a department chair and faculty for work experience education. And I also teach in political science, and I've served as the campus's program review coordinator and student learning outcomes assessment coordinator.
So our presentation is called Leveraging AI to Improve Student Learning at Scale. And so we're going to spend some time talking about what that means and also how we're trying to implement it at our college. Again, this is all sort of in its developmental stages, so we're not proposing anything grandiose that we've accomplished yet, but how we are thinking about it and how we are beginning to use it. So this is our sort of outline. We're going to be setting up a problem here, defining some terms, discussing in theory what this all means in terms of leveraging AI for assessment at scale, and then some of the ways in which we are looking at AI for solutions. So to begin, when we've been looking at some of the literature around assessment, we looked at Susky, for example, we see that there is some skepticism around assessment. And so we call this Susky's skepticism. And so just permit me to read this quote a little bit. Unfortunately, it is not possible to determine with complete confidence exactly what students have and haven't learned, because we can't get inside their heads to find out. The best we can do is to look at samples of their behavior, what they write, produce, say, and perform. And from those samples, try to estimate or infer what they have truly learned. Even under the best circumstances, making an inference from these snapshots of behavior is bound to be at least somewhat inaccurate because of what psychometricians call measurement error, fluctuations in human performance that we can't completely control. We cannot control the following, for example, whether a student is ill on the day she completes an assignment or takes a test, memory fluctuations. We all periodically blank out on key names and facts. Luck in whether a particular assignment or test question focuses on something a student knows well. We all learn some aspect of a subject better than others. So here, Susky introduces a sort of epistemological gap. We're all familiar with that in student assessment. So there's a question of how much we can close that gap and whether or not that gap undermines our efforts and to what degree. Nathan, did you want to add anything? I don't want to overtake.
No, that's great.
Okay. Julia too, let me know. Moreover, we find in Fulker and Pendergast this: we do not anticipate surprising any of our readers by reminding them that higher education has demonstrated meager evidence of improving student learning, and assessment is often blamed for the shortcoming. And so this is sort of a shocking admission. I've seen it in the assessment literature, and it almost seems to undermine our task. If it's not actually improving student learning, then why are we doing assessment? And there are, of course, many reasons to do assessment, but this would seem to be one of the primary ones. And so along with Volcker and Pendergast, we kind of speculate as to some of these issues. One of them has to do with horizontal and vertical alignment, where horizontal alignment means alignment of skills across courses that kind of reinforce each other as sort of the same sort of kind of outcome. And then vertical alignment has to do with aligning courses that seek to elevate the student's skill set from, say, a basic level, intermediate to an advanced outcome. So in that sense, you'd have typically a course progression and maybe a capstone. And we believe this requires faculty buy-in. That is, faculty who teach different courses need to work together to align SLOs and PLOs, program learning outcomes, and implementing and developing curricula that aligns. And part of the issue we observe even at our own campus is that even if faculty are kind of working off of the same curriculum, they're not always invested, especially in the assessment side of things, making sure there's alignment. Another issue that Volcker and Pendergast highlight is what we call the sort of tightrope between institutional fatigue and needed change. They speak of the fact that there's always a flux of administrators, of different coordinators with different ideas around how assessment should be implemented, how important it is, and how basically how faculty are going to complete it. And as a result, faculty are not invested as much. They feel lost in the confusion, and what we find is a certain sense in which, well, this is just a fad, it will change. This is just the current thing. Assessment's been around for a while, but I talk to faculty members on campus who still say, oh, this is just a fad, it will change, this is not really important. And then lastly, the question of how we utilize technology. On our campus, we have several different systems. They're often siloed, and it can be very difficult to integrate data, whether we're using data from our LMS, from our assessment platform, Nuventive, or data from our research institution, or institutional research, rather. Okay. And so we wanted to kind of also set down what we mean by learning improvement at scale. Volcker and Pendergast give us a very simple idea of what this would look like, or what this means. By learning, they mean knowledge, skills, and attitudes that students acquire through education. That seems pretty straightforward. Improvement here is demonstrated increase in student knowledge, skills, and attitudes due to changes in the learning environment. And we'll talk about that word learning environment in a moment. Maybe, Nathan, you want to talk about what a learning environment means here?
Yeah, sure. I'm looking at the chat, and this may set up how I want to kind of integrate a more theoretical understanding initially of the learning environment. But the question comes from Natalie. When you speak about alignment, do you mean aligning the SLOs from one course to the next? Like, should they be related and be consistent within the discipline?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we've sort of faced in our own SLO implementation. When I came into our committee, we were seeing that some courses would have the same SLO across the board. So it would be, some sort of generic SLO around understanding the discipline and its terminology and methodology. Say in philosophy, do you understand the methods of philosophy Do you understand sort of the basics of what philosophy is or religious studies? You understand the sort of methods around it. And that would be embedded in every single course. We moved away from that and placed it on the level of our program learning assessment. And instead, we've mapped various SLOs across our curriculum to that. So we might identify, say, in a logic course, how the mastering of skills there reinforce a more general outcome, if that makes sense, on the PLO level. Nathan, did you want to continue?
Oh, that was excellent. I kind of want to hedge it and just contextualize or re-theorize the learning environment with a more kind of theoretical approach. So the way to do this is I'll introduce a couple of terms, one coming from cybernetics. I'm definitely not an expert in cybernetics, but basically what I detect in the Volker et al. Book is, and Natasha Jankowski's approach, especially her afterword in this particular text, is the focus on a systems view. And so I understand the rhetorical aspect of the book. It's not, the intention is not to go into precisely what a system is, but it does play a very important functional and rhetorical role in the text. So I just want to spend like a couple minutes attending to that and the implications therein. So on the one hand, cybernetics, which was instituted in the 1940s by Norbert Wiener, and basically the emphasis is on the behaviors of the system. So if you want to know what a system is, you have to understand what it does and its particular behaviors. So that immediately draws our attention to the system that we would call kind of a learning environment. So you're not trying to get to the essence or some metaphysical principle of what the learning environment is, but you want to see what the effects are or the behaviors that manifest through this given environment. Well, how do we do this? Assessment, right? But I'm coming from a department, and I'm going to implicate myself, where we didn't have 100% compliance on SLOs. So I'm having to deal with institutional averages, and we know averages are, ideological constructions that mask complexity. So with that, cybernetics obviously attends to the notion of complexity and wants to understand various systems, but to do that, one must look at the behavior of the system. So I hope that's clear. And then what I want to do, Daniel, if you want to move the screen, does this lead up? Does this lead up? Right on. So the way that I'm framing is like just preparing for this and going through my own difficulty in writing my praise report, my program review for my own department, by virtue of having to negotiate institutional averages that do not give any insight into the complexity of the various systems that are happening in the classroom at all. So it just enforced for me the level of induction and inference making, which philosophically speaking, that we're haunted by the problem of induction. But
and this ties back to what we had with respect to the Susky slide before about this sort of skepticism we have about what assessment is doing, if we understand it as within this framework that you're talking about of the system, then that's analyzing behavior, then we're more honest in our approach, what assessment actually accomplishes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what Reza Negarestani is doing is he's in conversation with cybernetics. He's by that I mean he's admitting that we are no longer in a historical situation in which we know what a system is. That's not our concern. We're interested in what it does, its behavior, its functional integration. What are its functions? So it does create a gap similar to the gap that we're talking about in terms of addressing the scale of student learning from one level to the institutional level, that the way in which a system appears to be functioning may not be what it is. And so what Reza does is he's motivated by the concept of matter, right? But he unlike cybernetics, he wants matter to be understood as complex, meaning there's hierarchies to this matter, not hierarchies in a nefarious way, but there's various levels. And each level requires you to intervene in it and manipulate it in such a way so that you can come to know what it is. So he draws on, initially in this article, The Frontiers of Manipulation, from the Stoics and the Cynics, because their concern was with ethics. And so the Western philosophical tradition begins with know thyself. Are you in a position to know yourself? And so he basically uses this, the Delphic oracle dictum, know thyself, is in order to know yourself, you have to construct yourself. Therefore, you have to see yourself as a problem, not as like necessarily a moral problem, but a problem that can be manipulated, constructed, and then you learn something new about yourself that you didn't before that. So I'm sorry if I'm going a bit too long, but I'm just showing what the basis of this is. If you want to address scales in terms of learning, improving student learning, it is useful to, or at least for me, that's kind of what I'm presenting here, is that I think Reza's piece is important because not all scales are the same. And each scale, each level in a given institution requires specific forms of intervention, specific forms of manipulation, such that you can learn about a given layer. But Reza also informs us that we cannot overextend concepts to other levels. There's what he calls discontinuity.
Okay.
So long story short, when we apply Reza's framework to a learning environment and a given learning environment in relation to the overall system in which it is enveloped in, it does require us through SLOs, which is the entire point, to acquire the necessary data to understand this particular level, then make inferences based upon that about, well, how can this be used to address this next level? But it's always just being mindful that the concepts and insight that you learn from the first level may not overextend to the next level. So it requires further inquiry and further manipulation, which is why improving student learning at scale, as the authors indicate, is so fragile. and can go terribly wrong in an instant. So I'll pause there. And
well, yeah, I'd just like to tack on that the connection back to the Delphic dictum to know thyself really shows that the problem of assessment is what we might call a mystery. It's not properly a problem, it's a mystery. From the French existentialist Gabriel Marcel, he defines a mystery as a problem which encroaches upon its own data. And so that's what we're facing with assessment. This is why AI might be very well suited to helping us. You can't overcome a mystery because it is irresolvable. That's the epistemological gap Suski is pointing out. That's the problem that we face in trying to make assessment count, make it matter, make it reveal truth. We're teasing it out, and being able to do real-time assessment, being able to scale our assessments will help us to have a better self-perception as an institution.
Absolutely.
Shall I move on, or does anyone want to add anything, Julia or Nathan? Okay, so this might be a good slide, Nathan, for you to continue with talking about learning improvement versus value added, and I can kind of chime in.
Okay, so I'll just give, for this particular moment, some current research from the International Journal of Educational Technology in Higher Education. And this was published in January 2023, so a year ago. And the title of this article is Integration of Artificial Intelligence, Performance Prediction, and Learning Analytics to Improve Student Learning in Online Engineering Course. Now, there's a lot to say that my guess is we're going to see a lot of more use of AI analytics for STEM courses than the humanities, and there's probably ideological reasons for that. But I'll just save that for a later date. But what this particular program does is the concern that they had with improving student learning. And so the value aspect of it becomes, well, this is important to our engineering program. So how do we do this? How should we come to understand student success in this class? And what should we do to ensure that this particular, or at least the article that I'm referencing, has high success rates, because this is important for us. So long story short, they design an AI program that looks at 4 main pieces of data. Yes, I will share these articles. I'll send links in the chat. So thank you for the question. So what this program did is, in designing this AI program, they thought about how much background knowledge the student has coming into the course based upon some kind of pretest, and how often the students participate in online discussions, the depth and quality of what the student writes in the online discussions, and scores the student gets on their weekly assignments. Now, this is very interesting because I don't think chat is capable of this at this point in time. This algorithm's much closer to what ETS uses to assess like writing quality of like GRE exams, because it's specifically designed to address the quality of writing. Whereas chat is mainly, I'm going to dump a whole bunch of knowledge on you and try to have a conversation with you at this point. So to do this, I'm sorry if this is very technical, but this is, this probably research will be a template for other courses. So the AI program uses a Bayesian network to make its predictions. This is a clever way for the computer to learn patterns from data. So the key idea is that the system can start from some initial guesses about how important each piece of data is for predicting grades. Then, as it sees more student data, it updates and improves its predictions. And this is called Bayesian updating. But long story short, the real-time feedback that this algorithm gives students is almost like a dopamine rush for the students, and they respond to it more than the ordinary feedback that they get from their human professors. So that's just one instance in which AI is being leveraged, but this is not a large language model algorithm here. So they're not leveraging OpenAI's algorithmic architecture. This is much closer to ETS. ETS it's called the E-rater algorithm. But anyways, so and I'll pause here and allow my colleagues to speak, and I'll give everyone a copy of this research article.
That was excellent, Nathan. Are there any questions or comments so far? I think we're good. Keep going to our next example. Here we have another issue that I think we're all familiar with, something that holds back assessment in some ways. This is the difference between the empirical and the anecdotal. And I love how Fulker and Pendergast put this problem. They describe a situation in which, quote, students' skills have improved, but the program has only anecdotal evidence to back up the improvement claim. This is a tragic situation, and it's unfortunately common. It's akin to a marathon runner running a world record speed only to find out that the timing mechanism malfunctioned. They would never know they'd broken the record. If a new curriculum results in desired outcomes and no one is around to assess it, does it qualify as an improvement? We would argue it does not. Right, so it's sort of the old chestnut. If a tree falls in the forest without anyone there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. We could discuss that, but again, I think this goes back to this idea of, are we able to document the behavior and use it to leverage improvement? And if you're not observing it, it might as well not exist for you. So we could talk about whether there's the thing in itself or not, but it's not there for you. But we would contend that anecdotal data is not irrelevant. In fact, in the opening keynote speech, we saw that there is a place for the narrative of lived experiences, of our own observations of students in the classroom, but detached from empirical data, that can be very dangerous, because what we have found, in doing my own assessments, and I'm sure many of you might relate, is that if you don't have access to data, you start speculating and you start calling to mind things that stood out to you as a professor. That introduces bias. For example, I might call to mind, and this has in fact happened, a trend around some students who are veterans. And so I might make some anecdotal remarks about how the institution on a larger scale might have to address those issues. And that might be true. I'm not saying it's not true, but I didn't have any data to back that up because I wasn't really looking at the data. Alternatively, in this past cycle, I have become aware of about 16% of our students at Victor Valley College face housing insecurity. And indeed, I'm also aware through various departmental meetings of the ways in which our institution on a larger scale is seeking to remedy that issue. So they're building a Thrive Market where students can get food. They've created a center where students can go to meet with counseling, to find housing solutions, to seek mental health therapy, all sorts of issues to address student need. Now I know how my assessment of certain students who are not succeeding might actually connect to the overall mission of the college in addressing a certain demographic. And I can then embed my own anecdotes of students that I knew from the fall who, one of whom was living in a tent and had all of their materials for the course stolen midway through the semester. So the tent was ransacked essentially. And this student couldn't recover. It's not that I didn't try to intervene. Eventually, the student stopped attending, and I couldn't connect with the student again through, technology or anything. So that was a real issue, and sort of I could focus on that anecdote independently of the evidence, but then I wouldn't really understand how that's on a larger scale a problem at my institution. The other student I have in mind faced housing insecurity after a fire in which some of her family members were killed. And so there were a lot of issues for that student that stood in the way of success. And so again, looking at my data, I saw that these issues came and impacted student success for my outcomes, which is not surprising. But I was now able to understand it on a level of not just data and not just my personal observations, but an integration. So what I would like to argue is that anecdotal data provides a qualitative context for quantitative analysis. So this is a theme we're trying to develop in this discussion, is bridging the qualitative and quantitative divide in terms of not committing a fallacious category error. So leading one's assessment with anecdotes apart from the empirical data can lead to this sort of category error where you're making recommendations, maybe through your program review to the institution that will either be irrelevant or a waste of resources. And yet, if it's embedded, if these lived experiences, if these narratives are embedded with empirical data, it becomes extremely powerful because we always need to humanize data. That's why we use analytic tools to visualize, graph, and digest the data for us. And what I would say is these anecdotes are actually a way in which that can happen. What we would argue then is that AI can assist in disaggregation and flag patterns that might otherwise be missed. And I did pilot this past summer, disaggregating some of our data with the assistance of AI. I used GPT-4 to put in some of the data sets I was getting. Of course, you can't trust GPT to do everything perfectly. But again, with the human and the machine working together, you can gain new insights. And I was able to gain new insights and present them to the committee around patterns that I might have otherwise missed. So that was sort of an interesting finding for me. I don't know if anyone else in my group, Julia or Nathan, want to buttress or add to what I've said.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just talk about the ETS scoring guide of the institutional learning outcome and kind of.
Yeah, I think that's on our.
Is that next?
Yeah, okay. That's next. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can go there. Was there a question in the chat I saw go tick up? Oh, that was you. Okay.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Okay. But yeah, feel free to ask questions, comments, etc. So to kind of make this rubric development slide come alive, there was a really interesting kind of historical moment, if you will, at VVC, in which Daniel and another colleague of ours in our student learning outcomes committee in 2021 conducted an institutional learning outcome assessment through writing, correct, Daniel? Critical.
Yeah, that was our written communication ILO, which is probably common across many community colleges. So they'll be
yes, and so we used ETS to assess the written work. And the thing about ETS, that it's the algorithmic structure assumes there will be human assessors. So it's an interesting socio-technical assemblage. So the ETS, the E-rater did its thing, and Daniel and another colleague looked at the scores and performed quality control. And long story short, Daniel and our other colleague agreed with the scores that the algorithm generated after its assessment. And so this is really not that, it's almost trivial at this point, because this has been going on for a while with placement exams, with AccuPlacer and all these things. So this isn't unusual in higher education. However, what struck me, though, was that at the end of the day, this just confirms the Turing test. So Alan Turing and his famous Turing machine, won't bore everyone with this, but what effectively happened was not trivial, precisely because you know, I don't want to speak for you, Daniel, but you confronted that, like, wow, like the machine kind of performed in a way that that you, the human Daniel, agreed with. And so what Turing is basically saying is, the first step to engaging non-human intelligence is to admit that you have biases and prejudices against other forms of intelligence, where you devalue how they exhibit a form of intelligence. So that's kind of the essence, or the core of Turing's his thought experiment, is if in order to understand machine intelligence, the human needs to confront their own biases and prejudices that they hold and harbor against all other forms of intelligence. And so this is effectively what happened. And this then generated a whole form of, this is going back to my brief discussion on Reza's piece, and understanding material complexity and intervening at certain layers with certain concepts that can't extend themselves. Well, what effectively happened is we realized, wow, AI is capable of getting things right, right? And what else can this do at the level of assessment? So the rubric, I'll let Daniel go into the rubric, but hopefully this wasn't
right. So that was one aspect, is that AI could assist in actually in applying the rubric to the assignments to see if they're successful or not. And we did find that it was highly accurate in that rubric. Now, since this is ETS, they gave us the rubric. It wasn't like we developed the rubric. So as we move away from ETS and using our own rubric, this might have to function differently for us in terms of how we would want AI to work with us. I'm not confident, as Nathan mentioned, that ChatGPT is up for it, up for the task. It would be more like experimental at this point. I don't know when 5 is coming out, or if there's something that's going to overtake that AI model. But again, it's all nascent, sort of beginning stages. But one thing that AI could help us with is helping us to develop the rubric itself. And again, one thing we're working on at our institution is making sure that we do have common rubrics across our different courses with different faculty members. And this is, again, that attempt to bridge the quantitative and qualitative divide. How do we take the quality of the student work and reduce it to a number by which we can demonstrate learning? And that, I think, requires that we come to consensus. Again, this requires faculty buy-in. And one thing might be interesting is to take a common rubric and then work with AI to modify it to better align with a particular course, a particular assignment, and the way a certain SLO is worded in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. So that's something that we were thinking about in terms of moving forward to help assist our faculty in the development of these rubrics. Anything else? I think we move on. Here, I'm going to hand the mic over to Julia to talk a little bit about rolling up our assessments in contrast to the ETS.
Yeah, I think one of the things the challenge on our campus always is, there's such a deep body of, how you approach student learning and philosophical approaches, but how do you, as a practitioner, help your faculty, grasp these concepts and utilize them for their assessment purposes. And part of this to me is making sure that we find ways to really put this in their hands so that they can feel empowered to use the assessment process to improve student learning. And sometimes that does mean using a bunch of different communication tactics to get through to folks. Because we have every kind of experience level on this campus. We have faculty, I was gonna call them students, but faculty where when I ask for a rubric on a writing assignment, they're like, what's a rubric? Or I'll say, hey, what's your rubric for assessing this assignment? And they'll show me something that's not a rubric at all. There's also faculty who know what a rubric is, but refuse to use one. And so to me, I really like trying to make this something visual. And I know on the SLOAP committee, we've talked about one of the things that we're going to be doing is we're going to kind of use what Chafee did. And I don't know if everyone's familiar with what Chafee did. I guess now it'd be a year and a half ago. Time changed to me after COVID. But Chafee kind of blew up their whole assessment system, and they paused their assessment practices to the point where they worked on aligning every single student learning outcome in every pathway to their institutional learning outcomes within Canvas. And so it's a behemoth of a project that they did. They basically did all these exercises to make sure that faculty were aligning, their assignments properly. And then on the back end of Canvas, also making sure that it's tagged to the institutional learning outcomes. So they ended up being able to show, after a few terms, how many times a student was touching an ILO within these student learning outcome assignments. And so they also broke down their institutional learning outcomes into career aptitudes. So they were able to, because of this proficiency they gained in mapping their SLOs to their ILOs, they had this halo benefit of being able to do micro badging. And so, mapping even career aptitudes within the ILOs so that the students could earn badges, like if they touch the ILO a certain number of times. And so this is something we've been working on as well. And, to be honest, for years, because of the varying proficiencies we have with our faculty on this campus, varying from people who are like, oh my gosh, what is assessment, to, I've dabbled in it, to, oh, actually, I have some pretty advanced philosophical thought on it. We've always gone back to, how are you aligning? Are you checking your student learning outcomes through making sure your course outline of record is up to date, looking at how the SLOs map to the PLOs, map to the ILOs. And, interestingly, we also did this on the non-instructional side. So we've relied heavily on the instructional side for this presentation, but, we worked with the non-instructional side to make sure all their service area outcomes were aligned properly with their mission statements. And then that their tool of assessment was appropriate to what they were assessing. So I guess my trying to be the short version of this, all of the things that we're doing, and it's ironic that I didn't provide any images for this, but all of this is to help our faculty and staff visualize the assessment practice, really make it meaningful to them. I don't run across many faculty or staff who are really super like, assessment, I love it. I'm wearing the assessment jersey. I'm running around campus. I'm saying how great it is. And so even to just get people into the process, it's a huge thing. And so if they can visualize the outcomes, it helps. I will say too, because we have so many system, I haven't met a campus yet that has like a fully integrated system. And if I saw that happen, it would be amazing. But, we use different technologies to get things done. But, for lack of a better word, when we're looking at the back end, when we're looking at the results that we're getting in from our SLO, PLO, and ILO assessment, AI, and I think we touched on this later, AI can be used to help us reduce bias when we have those large sample sizes. So, we have plugged our data into AI at times just to get kind of like a second opinion. It doesn't necessarily mean like we take what AI says and we use that as our complete analysis, but it can help us tease out things that might have been subjective or, anecdotal is good, but maybe there was things in our assessment that weren't really totally applicable. And so AI can help us have another lens through which we interpret the data. Nathan, Daniel, did I miss anything that you guys wanted to talk about?
No, I have this question of what is AI in terms of its biases? Is it bias free? Is it, I would describe it as a view from nowhere. It tries to be objective in that it doesn't want to give a particular subjective perspective. At the same time, it's trained on data that, it's trained on what it finds on the internet. Therefore, it is biased. And in some ways it can be dangerous. Mm-hmm. And that sort of feeds into our next presentation. We'll talk about that a little bit. So if you're interested in that, we have another presentation coming up in about a half hour on the dangers of AI. And so we're kind of, and that's particularly geared towards the question of student use of AI and how that affects assessment. And so we're sort of do as I say, not as I do. We're wanting to experiment with AI and see how it can help us with assessment, while also showing that there might be some potential problems. And we as faculty need to be aware that AI, it can expose our biases, but if as Julia was saying, if we don't double check it, if we just plug in the data and there's no one at the helm reviewing it, that's as irresponsible as any student who hits Control-C, Control-V. So anyways, I don't know if Julia or Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, if chat was built on the ETS AI architecture, it would be critiquing how you even ask the question itself. Whereas chat doesn't even, it can just guess, which is the basis of it. It's why it feels so conversational, because it's not going to judge you about how you misspelled the question or how your syntax is messed up in this question. Whereas the ETS architecture would absolutely destroy you because that's what it's assessing, the quality. Chat doesn't care, which is kind of the interesting dialectic that we're in. So anyways, but should we open it up for questions or comments?
Yeah, we just had a slide that kind of concluded. Those were our 4 points that we were looking at: value-added assessments, anecdotes, rubrics, and rolling up assessments. So we'll open it up for questions from the audience for sure. I'm curious if anyone else has used AI in their assessment process. They maybe are concerned about that and as an ethical question. Or okay, we have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Could you give a specific example of education testing services and going to integrated on campus? So in our ETS, this was our primary mode for testing institutional level learning outcomes, which were we would purchase a certain number of exams and then select a sample of students, have them come in, sit down and take an exam, or typically they had to write an essay, and then it would be evaluated. It was a very artificial environment, and we noted in our own ILO reports that because of that, students we found were struggling with even very competent students in our SLO assessment on that level were struggling in the ETS environment. And you might say it's because it's got this very standardized rubric, but I was arguing in our ILO assessment that taking a student out of the environment they're used to and putting them in this artificial circumstance of taking a test they have never seen before, it takes them out of the sociological circumstance that they find themselves to understand the sort of symbolic meaning of the test. It's sort of like if you give someone a word problem, they might be able to solve it a lot better than if I gave them a logic puzzle using strictly logical notation. They might be unfamiliar with that. And you sort of see this with the Watson selection task, which is a study that shows that people can sort of intuitively solve logical puzzles, but when it's formalized, it becomes very difficult. And so we, as an institution, have been wanting to move away from ETS towards this integrated model because we believe it will better represent what we're achieving on campus. I don't know if that answered the question, but Nathan or Julia, if you want to.
Yeah, that was great. And then the next question, can AI help identify gaps in alignment between SLO, PLO, and ILO? Yeah, I mean, when I'll just speak for my own experience, before before there was 3.5, which is the more democratized version of ChatGPT, I was playing around with the level or the architecture below it. It was 3. It was still pretty sophisticated. And one of my colleagues in my department had to do a substantial revision on their course outline of record for a creative writing course. So I just tried it out. So I just copy and pasted this is going to partially answer your question, but I think you'll see where I'm driving to. So I just highlighted the course objectives and the student learning outcomes and basic prompt, can you identify any discrepancies between the course objectives and the student learning outcomes? And I gave it some more specific parameters, like this was a creative writing course. And what it generated was like, yeah, this makes literally no sense. There's I'm kind of paraphrasing here and anthropomorphizing what it said, but it basically identified contradictions. And then it told me I need to update the student learning outcomes because it doesn't align with what's going on in the 21st century. So that freaked me out. And I've never told my colleague this because, well, we all know what that can do. But nonetheless, I was struck with it's on the one hand, it's not biased. It doesn't have to rhetorically navigate a department. So it's going to compute what it thinks are contradictions in ways where it doesn't have to be rhetorically tactful to articulate these contradictions. So in that sense, I think I know for a fact ChatGPT-4 is brilliantly capable of this.
We also have an audience member saying, I'm using AI to put together all of my themes from the qualitative responses. That's great. So
totally. Yeah. That just reminds me of my almost like ethnography days. Shout out to Fresno State. That's where I did my master's at Fresno State. So yeah, that would have came in real handy during these ethnographies that I was doing.
I don't see any more questions unless somebody else has one. I should probably get ready for our next sessions, and hope to see some of you over there. GPT-4 can access files. You can upload, for example, spreadsheets, images, Word documents, and it will scan the data.
Oh yeah.
Not always accurately though. Again, still something that needs to be developed, but the rapid pace at which we're seeing it developed, I wouldn't be surprised if in a year they've worked out a lot of the bugs. We're already seeing that, images are improving. The output is much cleaner.
The other AI system that's comparable, that's somewhat better than Chat-4 is Anthropic. It's called, the AI system is called Claude specifically. I'll put in the chat and then we'll close out. And you can upload files to it.
Perfect.
Right on. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.